make a point to say this is not like the worldly meditation we hear about.
Yeah.
Right.
That's just quieting ourselves for that sake.
Right.
It's a quieting to hear from someone.
Yes.
It is to connect us to a living God
Yes.
that we can't see or touch, but there is a way that we can connect with him that's hard to explain, but that requires that
Yes.
quieting of our internal life a little bit. And so it's not just, empty your mind and that will be the solution. No, it's calm the noise to connect with the one you were made for.
Welcome to Let's Talk Practices, and on today's episode, we are talking silence and solitude with my good friends Kelly Needham and Sheri Lee. Y'all, thank you so much for being here on our podcast, talking about a subject that for some people, this is their love language, and for some people, they want to avoid this like the plague. But first, tell us just a little bit about who are y'all?
Kelly?
Yeah, I'm Kelly Needham, and have been around Stonegate for a long time. 12 years. Married to Jimmy Needham, one of the pastors here, and we have 5 kiddos. 13 to 1 is our spread of children. And so silence and solitude is a really important conversation for me today.
Yes, it is.
And my name is Sheri, and I've been around Stonegate for about 12 years also. And I have 3 girls that are all adults and have their own families, and we've got 4 grandbabies with 1 just being born in May.
Wonderful.
So I have learned silence and solitude over the years. It is definitely easier as kids get bigger.
Yes.
So you're saying things can get better.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, as we start out, I think it's helpful to just define what we're talking about. So I say the words solitude and silence. I can mean lots of things. But Sheri, define for us what we mean in today's episode when we say silence and solitude.
Well, what's funny is my definition actually comes from working with you to prepare for when I taught this, and it is fasting from noise to feast on God.
Yeah. I love that. Fasting the noise to feast on God.
It's like, we gotta say it again. I'm glad you said that again.
Yeah.
We don't think of noise as something to fast often.
Yeah.
We
That's
do
a good
not.
definition.
We don't. I love that. And that the trade isn't, there's a way to just disconnect from noise and still not connect with God.
There is. And I think it's important, too, to define that the noise is not necessarily audible noise. It's the noise of life. It's the busyness of life. It's the crazy calendar. It's running around everywhere, trying to make sure everything's done. The noise that life brings.
Yeah.
That's what we're fasting from, to sit with God and connect with him.
Oh, that's so good. Would you say, what are the differences between solitude and silence?
That's a great question.
Any
Is that directed
ideas?
at me? I was like,
Either one, take it.
I mean, they're in some ways they're connected ideas, right? Solitude implies I'm alone, and silence implies I'm not. There's not noise, and you can be alone and it be very noisy. You could be blaring music, be physically very noisy, or your mind and heart can be very noisy, and you can also be with people and not feel that. So I think both things are important for that, the connection with God that we're talking about, that I am alone and I am also silent. So I think they work together, but they're 2 different ideas. I don't know if you guys would say anything different than that. But
No, I would agree. I think in order to have the connection that we're looking for, it does take being alone, so you're not distracted by other people. But it also takes silencing the noise around you so that you can actually sit and listen for what God has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I tell a story about that?
Please
If
do.
that's helpful right
That
now.
sounds great. Yeah.
Because I had a day with all my kids at home recently, and everybody was busy the whole day, right? So I had got nothing done. I have a bunch of work that I'm worried about, tasks that I'm stressed about. And so when we finally hit nap time, which is that glorious part of the day where things settle just a little bit, right? All my littlest went down, all the olders were busy, and I went to my room, and I was alone. I had solitude, but I was not quiet. There was not silence. And in that moment, all those tasks just felt like they crashed onto me. I mean, it was like, what do I do right now? I need to respond to this email. I need to do this task. I need to, this thing. My mind and my heart were just busy and I felt anxious. So I was alone. I had solitude, but I did not have silence. And it actually prompted this practice. I made myself walk outside. So again, I was still alone, but I was now pursuing the silence of, I'm going to quiet the noise in my heart, the noise of tasks, the noise of work I have to do, because I'm sensing that my soul something is awry in my soul, and I need to connect with the one who is the shepherd of my soul. And so I needed not just solitude, which I already had in part, I needed silence as well. And that's the harder part. If I'm honest, that's the part that's scarier, harder,
I would agree.
and feels like you said, a fast from that. It feels difficult in the same way a fast from food is difficult. And but it ended up being a really wonderful hour sitting outside. Kids were interrupting. The older ones. It's not like it was this glorious, wonderful moment, but in that sense that no one interrupted me, but it was a pursuit of aloneness with God and silence of tasks, to walk away from the computer and the to-do list and just go, Jesus, I need you to speak here.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a phenomenal story of how it works live, right? Because there's an idealized version. Like if I could have my ideal situation of how this might go down, there's that version, and then there's reality, which is what actually happens, especially when you're in a season of life that may not lend itself. Not just kids at home is only one of the scenarios of the things that's really difficult about silence and solitude. Sheri, tell us your experience. How did God develop in you? I was about to say a love for, but I would actually love to know if you went from hating it to loving it. How did God develop this in you to go to care about this and to say this matters and I want to pursue this?
Yeah, well, honestly, it's when I came on staff at Stonegate. When I came on staff at Stonegate, we had a soul assessment every week, and two of the questions. One was, has your soul been quiet or busy? And one was, have you practiced silence and solitude? And so having to answer that every week prompted me to seek out with our care pastor at that time, what does this even look like? I've never practiced this. I've never heard of it. I've never been encouraged. I have no clue what this looks like.
Yeah.
And when I started, I think like most women, my mind is reeling with all of the things I need to get done.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's work or kids or whatever. And my brain is so busy. And I experience that every night when I go to bed. Every time I get still, I have that. And so it was so hard.
Yeah.
And so, I think there was definitely I don't like this at first because I can't do it. And when I can't do things, I don't like them.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Well, yeah.
So I did not like it. And it took a lot of patience and a lot of encouragement. Our care pastor kept encouraging. And I kept going back, and I found a sweet spot. And when I found the sweet spot where I could really sit with the Lord and be quiet, and I learned what that looked like, it changed.
What do you feel like that sweet spot was? What changed to make it that way?
One, I found a really good place. And I will say my main spot for silence and solitude is the bath. I go in there and I can lock the door so no kids can come in. I don't take my phone. I sit in hot bath water and just sit with the Lord. And a story that I think really brought this home for me was my middle daughter helped me decorate my house. That's what she does. And at the time that this happened, the house we lived in, she chose to put a piece of art on the wall that when I sat in the bathtub, it was sitting right in front of me. I questioned her when she did it because it made no sense, because where it was when you walked in the bathroom, it was over here. So nobody could see it. But it was Song of Solomon 4:7 that says, you are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. And just being a person that constantly feels like I have to earn God's approval, one day I just felt like he said that to me when I was being still and quiet. And when I saw that and I heard it from him, it just changed a lot for me in that moment. And so that became something that became very dear to me, is to look at that and know that as I took the time to sit with him, that is how he sees me.
I love that. That is the glory of silence and solitude, is connection with the living God.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yes.
I love that.
What an incredible invitation. What other wild things could he say that our hearts desperately need to hear?
Oh, so much.
I learned about silence and solitude, I feel like, in a really distinct part of time. Kelly, we were friends as I was like going through this, but this was, my kids were probably both, I had 2 kids probably under 2 at this point, 2 under 2.
Yeah.
And I was reading a book, and in the book it just lauded the praises of silence and solitude. And I am not joking, when I read the chapter, I had to read it again because I was like, I don't feel like I understand what he's even talking about. And then after I read it again, I understood it, but I was still really critical. Like, I was like, what, are we supposed to go be in a cave by ourselves and we're just going to magically come out transformed? You know, God wants us to be transformed in community. And I had a lot of opinions about it. And I remember telling my husband this, all my opinions about solitude, and he just goes, really kindly, but he goes, I just think that maybe you should try it before you knock it. And I was like, well, fine. And I remember trying that. I was like, I'm going to set a timer. It recommended that in this book that I read. I'm going to set a timer and just try and quiet my mind and just be quiet, and we'll just see how this goes. And I went into it with a lot of cynicism, like, this is going to be ridiculous. And the first thing that struck me is how hard it is to do that.
Yep.
But I also was encouraged because the same book also encouraged me, when you try to do this, what's about to happen is that your brain will feel like there are a bunch of monkeys in a banana tree.
Yep.
And it's going to be
Yes.
very loud and very
Yes.
crazy.
So accurate.
And
Yes.
that is normal. So it encouraged me that's super normal.
Yes.
And that if you will commit to it over time, what will happen is it'll still be bananas in a monkey tree, but you will get better at calming the monkeys down.
Yeah.
Like, you'll get better at and quicker at calming the monkeys down. And so I found that the longer I did it, I always did a timer for 10 minutes. Just a timer of like, it is that time to do that. I set a timer, and I did find that the longer I did it, the quicker I was able to silence the monkeys in the banana tree. That later on would come back, but in that moment, it was better. Within weeks of doing this regularly, I found myself craving it as definitely a self-professed, extroverted, I want to be around people always with music or noise or something on. I found myself for the first time in my life craving quiet, and not just because I had little kids. Like, I wanted the quiet that would allow me to listen to God. And it was a very distinct and sudden difference for me. Yeah. And that's where for some reason, the paradigm of a fast really did help me. I understood fasting from food to feast on God. This was the first time in my life I thought, willingly give up the noise, the busy, whatever that is, so that you can have something else in God. So I remember us being friends in that and telling you those things and being like, so here's what also happened. I was like, Kelly, how do you practice solitude? And she was like, I just take sometimes I take a week or like a whole weekend and I cancel all my social plans. And I just say, this is going to be for silence. And all my free time is just in quiet with God. And I do everything I can to spend all my time doing that. And in that moment, I said, dear God, do not call me to that. I did. I was like, obviously, I'm not going to do it that way. So just to say where I have come from, I have grown a lot to value silence, solitude, what it does for my soul, to crave it now more than ever as something that's healthy for me. So,
well, and I love that you're sharing the 10-minute timer, because I think as a practice, it's valuable no matter how long it is or short it is.
That's right.
It
That's
is
right.
a valuable practice at 5 minutes, at 10 minutes, or at 30 minutes or an hour. It's like, it's not about that so much. But if somebody's listening going, well, I don't even know where to start. Let's start with a 10-minute timer. Start with a 5-minute timer. But just dedicate the time to, I'm just going to sit still, not to, and I think it's good to even make a point to say this is not like the worldly meditation we hear about. That's just quieting ourselves for that sake. It's a quieting to hear from someone. It is to connect us to a living God that we can't see or touch, but there is a way that we can connect with him that's hard to explain, but that requires that quieting of our internal life a little bit. And so it's not just, empty your mind and that will be the solution. No, it's calm the noise to connect with the one you were made for. But the quieting the noise is a practice.
Yeah, I think a passage that I think about a lot is Psalm 63.
Yes.
So I looked in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you, and I will lift my hands as long as I live. And I think it is that moment of seeing that something is better. He is better.
Yep.
And so I think even just setting the time aside changes your heart posture to say, I want to receive from the one that is better. I want to connect with the one that is better.
Yeah.
And so even I think if you walk out of it thinking, man, this failed this time, you still took the time to set aside time and say, God, I see you as better. I want to connect with you. And that's a win, no matter what you walked out of that first time.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remember to just keep showing up. Just keep setting aside the time and saying, God, you're better. I want to receive from you. I want you to transform me. I want to connect with you.
Yeah. I want to get real specific on what this can be both what you actually do, but also, what you recommend someone do when they say, okay, I'd like to try that. What am I actually doing in my time that I've set aside for silence and solitude? What am I doing? What am I not doing? What does that sound like? What am I doing with my body and myself? Kelly, you go first.
That initial part of that solitude and silence time is so much a calming of all the craziness in your internally. And so I think that may be very specific for different people. For me, being outside or being able to see outside is really helpful for me. One, it gives my eyes something to look at. I think that feels very silly to say, but sometimes just to be in a room with four walls, it's like or to be in my house that holds all my tasks.
Yeah.
I look around and I see dishes to clean, a thing to put in the mail, and I can't calm down. So to give myself the visual of God's creation and to watch the wind in the trees, it's a way for me to set my mind on the activity of God, not on my own activity. To look at creation around me, and I need something to pay attention to as I'm trying to take these crazy things popping up. Oh, you never responded to your mother-in-law from yesterday. Oh, okay. Set it aside. Lord, I'm here to talk to you. Oh, you didn't respond to the kids' school email thing. Okay, I have to have something to look at. And then I often have to have something to do with my body. And so that has looked differently. Sometimes that has been sitting on the ground, laying on the ground, or being on my knees, something where I'm just physically away from things I can do has helped. Yeah. Or if I'm outside, I don't know. I hope that helps somebody listening who might want to do this. It feels very visceral at the beginning of that silence and solitude. Like sometimes I'm sitting outside and just literally rocking through the feelings of oh my gosh, there's so much to do. Lord, I know I need this time. I'm going to hold on to the armrest. I'm going to look at this. It's a very physical experience for me. Yeah. Personally. So it's something to look at and something to do with my hands. Sometimes I actually have had a kid's stress ball, oh. Because it's a process of letting those thoughts calm down and in faith, casting them aside to then let my heart and mind calm down and then talk to God. And then it usually also involves for me a type of pouring out my heart to him, which I think is in Psalm 62, which it also starts with, in silence, I wait for you, God. Yes. That it is in silence we wait for God and pour out our hearts to him. And so it's all those things I'm worrying about, instead of just trying to squash them down, I'm giving them to him. God, you're going to have to help me with all these tasks that are coming to mind. God, I can't even do them all today if I tried. Will you just help me right now to calm down? So I'm trying to talk to him even as the chaos is slowly settling. And once the chaos calms for me, one of my primary agendas often is to ask God, what do you have for me? What do you want me to know? I want to hear from you. What are you doing in the world right now? What do you want me to know? And then just listening. And once the chaos is calm, you can actually sit quietly and give space for that.
Yes.
So that's a lot of my process.
That's great.
That's good.
Sheri, similar. What does the process look and sound like for you? You shared some of it, but
I did.
What does that look like?
I have two primary ways, I think, and one is the bath, and that's where I'm still. It's just a place to relax, and typically there I start with either a Psalm 62 or 63. just kind of reading or quoting it to myself and reminding myself why I want more of him, you know, and then it is a lot of pouring my heart out, because I think the scriptures, the whole point is to calm all of the thoughts.
Yeah.
And then it does go to pouring my heart out and then asking, what do you have for me? And sitting and listening. The other thing that I tend to do is taking a walk, which is being outside with no phone, no nothing.
Yeah.
And looking around. There's just something about looking and observing nature and being reminded of who he is, how big he is, how powerful he is, how good he is, looking at all of the different colors in nature, all of the different textures in nature, and being reminded of just who he is, and then thinking about how much he loves me. You know, in that moment, this huge God wants to know me. And then it moves into a similar, you know, talking to him and then asking what he has. I do think some other things that you can do are, there's the Lectio Divina, which is a great practice. There is, I think if you are an artist, I think even, and you need to do something, even sitting with a canvas or something in a quiet space where you're focusing on the Lord as you work, I think that could be a really fruitful way to spend time with the Lord in silence. So I think that there's lots of things that you can do. I think it's just being creative and figuring out what fits you.
Yeah.
And I know that even in the silence, sometimes I have found myself like, I think a lot of times when you get quiet, some hard things might come to the surface. The Lord might bring some things up that you may not want to think about. And I will say probably I can think back to a very specific time that was a hard season in my life, and practicing silence and solitude, and this was in my bathtub, where I literally sat and grieved with the Lord, had no words, nothing to say, and I just cried. Like, I cried like if you'd walked into my house, you probably would have wondered what in the world is going on. It was loud sobs that I just could not contain, that finally had space to come out. Because I think we push things down so often, and so giving that space can allow those things to come out, and it gives you a space to grieve. But I will say that, I mean, I can think of 2 or 3 times specifically where I was there, and I just felt the presence of God in a way that I never have in another way. And so, you know, I think that's another thing that comes with silence and solitude, is giving space for healing that the Lord can bring in a way that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think that's amazing. There's a lot of barriers that we face to just getting time, like the barrier alone of having time for this. That's a big barrier. And then the other barriers I think that I experience too are very internal barriers of, like, first get the time and space. Now the next barrier is, can I even calm down what's going on inside my mind and schedule and heart? So, like, there's another thing. And then another one is I sometimes I will, and I know people will avoid silence and solitude because something hard, hurtful, convicting is already lingering, and we know if you give it enough space, I got to deal with myself and with God, and that feels very scary. That can feel very difficult. And another, I think a hurdle in there is actually receiving, because when you're in silence and solitude, the key is you're actually not doing, you're not serving. Sometimes you're praying. There's less Bible reading, maybe. Study feels like one thing. This feels like something else. There's a distinct lack of doing. And so this is a receiving exercise, which receiving alone can be hard, right? Just receive that I don't have to do anything for him in this moment. That alone can be really difficult. Do you guys, you just shared one. Kelly, do you have a story? Do you have any memory of distinctly getting through the hurdle of receiving from him in solitude?
I mean, that feels like it colors so much of those moments for me that it's almost hard to distinguish one particular one that stands above the rest, because that feels so much like a characteristic of silence and solitude. That's one of the reasons it's hard, is we live in a culture that finds identity in doing, and so to not do for no other reason than to connect with a person feels very unusual and abnormal to us. But some of those longer times that you referenced earlier have had some key moments and even key days in those maybe weeks I set aside where I feel like God was uprooting in those moments of silence identity that was attached to doing in my life through the very act of, I love you right now as you sit and do nothing.
Yes.
Do nothing for me. Can you do that with me and for me? Can you sit here and contribute nothing to your family, to yourself, to your community, to your church? Nothing. Can you just be? And my answer is always, no, I can't. I can't do that. Lord, it's too hard. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And realizing that that part is a place of fruitfulness, right? The one who abides produces much fruit. And so much of it is all colored by that, but there have been a few key moments where I've felt like a kind of visceral undoing of my activity from my identity that didn't feel very wonderful in the moment, but produced lasting fruit after that, and even more freedom to enter back into silence and solitude and moments of stillness, knowing that my doing is not what God needs or wants primarily.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
I actually remember a handful of years ago when Kelly first told me limits are beautiful. You need to understand your limits. I'm like, limits? Who wants to have limits? I don't like my limits. I want to push against my limits.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I do think one of the beauties of silence and solitude is it teaches you to rest and to be okay with your limits. That there is an okayness to not doing. And in that moment, you learn trust.
yeah.
Because when we're pushing against our limits, we're not trusting.
Yeah.
We're trying to do. And so for me, that's been a key thing of silence and solitude that it's taught me is I do have limits.
Yeah.
He loves me with the limits he created me with.
Yeah.
And it's okay to rest in those and trust that he is doing what he needs to do.
Yeah. I love it. Let's say someone out there is going, okay, I really want to try. I want to give it a shot for some silence and solitude, but I don't know where to start. Sheri, give us some practical, give us the beginner's guide on beginning to put silence and solitude in our lives.
I mean, I do think a good place to start is starting with like a Psalm 63, where you are sitting and you are looking at how beautiful the Lord is, meditating on a passage. And by meditating on a passage, I mean read through it again slower, read through it again even slower, and then pray through it and ask the Lord to bring that about in you. And I pray Psalm 63, it starts with, oh God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you, my soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. And I have to sit and think, do I really want him that much? My life would say no.
Yeah.
And so, Lord, I need you to make me want you like this. Help me see you in a light that makes me want you.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with something like that.
Yeah.
And asking him to get you there and praying, and then asking him what he has to say to you. And then I really think the biggest thing I would say is don't stop.
Yep.
When you start and it's hard and you walk away and you feel like, well, that was a waste of time. It wasn't. It wasn't. So keep doing it.
Yeah.
Keep showing up. Give him a chance.
Yeah.
Keep showing up. Keep working and trying to talk to him and ask him to quiet your mind, whether it's a walk outside, whether it's sitting somewhere quiet, and just keep showing up.
Yeah. The Lord responds to people who pester him.
Yes.
I mean, he commands us to, right? Like the
Yes.
widow who, wouldn't leave the judge alone.
That's
It's
right.
like, I'm like that. Bug me.
Yes.
It is, if you continue to sit with him
He will.
every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, Lord, I'm here. These crazy ladies on this
Yes.
podcast said to do this and that you would show up in my life. So I'm here, day 3 again.
Yes.
Nothing's happening, but I'm keep coming back. You keep
Yes.
doing that and your life will change. Just write us an email. We want to know
Send
about
us-
it. It's
send
going to
us your
happen.
stories.
It
No,
will.
I
tag
think
us in
it
it.
is. It's good for people to hear too that the first couple of times you do this might feel like a waste of
Or
time.
the first handful of times.
Right,
Yeah.
this didn't produce anything.
Yeah.
It's like, no, in faith we do this.
Yeah. I think of Isaiah 30, which you introduced me to, 15 through 18.
So good.
If you have trouble with silence and solitude, look up Isaiah 30, 15 through 18. It starts with saying that in rest, in returning, your salvation is found. But we run from it.
You weren't willing.
But at the end of that, it says, the Lord your God waits graciously for you. And so I think
Yeah.
going into it, knowing that he's waiting.
He's waiting.
He is waiting for us to set aside time and say, I want to connect with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that. Y'all, thank you for being here on our podcast today. So thrilled that you guys got to come. I just love you guys so much and that we got to talk about it. One thing that we're asking everybody who comes on the podcast, are there what practices would you like to grow more in your life right now?
Besides more of this for me right now with the kids in the busyness of life. Yeah. This, I would say, I'd also say memorizing scripture. That's another one that's been kind of growing. I've grown interested in pursuing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Sheri?
I would say probably for me right now is Sabbath. You know, rolling off staff here at Stonegate has created a different rhythm in my life.
Yeah.
And I've found Sabbath to be harder.
Yeah.
Coming out of that rhythm where it's a normal thing. And so I think reestablishing Sabbath would be something that I'm like, yes.
Awesome.
I need that.
Wonderful. Well, guys, thank you so much. So glad you're here. Guys, thank you so much for listening to Let's Talk Practices, this one on silence and solitude, and join us for our next one. Thanks.